Here we are, live from Oakland, California. I have two young men on with me that I met via the internet. And if you listen to this show for a while, especially when it was just in its audio-only phase, I would come across people that, wrote things that I found interesting, or I'm actually relatively good friends. I would say good friends with Professor Harvey J.K., and actually one of his students had wrote an interesting paper on what her opinion was for the future of education. I put her on the show. So one thing I do like highlighting, I know the biggest platform I try, is the voices of people that don't get heard as much on some of these platforms. Maybe because of where they're located, sometimes because of age. But to me, the grander left project has to include everybody, not just old guys who are writing about old guys. I want to hear what people almost 20 years younger, you guys are almost 20 years younger than me, by the way, are have to say about the world. I may not agree with everything, but I want to hear what you have to say. I think you guys have some interesting perspectives. And you guys had wrote something. I don't know how it got on my radar. Maybe just from one of you guys posting on social media, or maybe one of you shared it with me.
Yeah.
And I subscribe to the Substack. I'll put a link up in the description for this show for you guys' Substack. There's some good work on there.
Fantastic. Thank you.
You wrote a thing about white fragility, and I remember when Robin DiAngelo was hitting a few years back before that book had dropped. And as we were talking earlier, I told you guys I worked in the tech world, even from a contracting perspective, but I still worked in office in these places that are extremely white. And my I hate saying girlfriend. I feel like I'm too old to say it, but my girlfriend, I'm old as shit. She's kind of old. She's not as old as me, but she's old as shit too. I shouldn't say that. Hopefully she can't hear me. She doesn't listen to this show. Watch this be the one show she fucking listens to. I'm old as shit, huh? How old is the couch, motherfucker?
Yeah, we just see her come into the room, and she's like, hey, got a knife now.
Yeah, no, she would just shake her head and lock the door. But she deals with things in her line of work as well. But one thing we both, this is what I do full time now, but when I wasn't doing this, I definitely had, even at the homeless shelter I was at, some implicit bias training, which was mildly maddening. And we'll get into that later. But I wanted to ask you guys, what was the impetus to even look into this? Is this something that happens to you guys in your work lives? Do you have to do the implicit bias training as well now?
Good. Yeah. It's a good question. So I guess it hit my radar. I remember when because I graduated from UMKC, the University of Missouri, Kansas City in 2019. I remember the year before that book came out, and it was kind of, being thrown around a lot. Like, I don't see, I was in music school, so we didn't have to read it or anything, but well,
there was no implicit bias in the music department, huh?
Right. But I remember being thrown around, and I was kind of like, okay, what is this? And I kind of put it away. And then I remember it coming back up around last May, when all the protests were
George
happening.
Floyd stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Right after George Floyd was murdered. And I work at a public library. And so I remember it was starting to come up on some reading lists, because there was all these, Black Voices reading lists that were coming up, and I was going through them, and I was kind of like, okay, this book was like one of the top ones hitting, and I was
really,
yeah, it was in the list.
Black Voices, and it was Robin DiAngelo.
Oh yeah, welcome to Missouri.
There you go. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it was.
What about James Baldwin? I don't know about him.
We'll get into that. Yeah. Okay, so that was my
There's
thing.
a white woman with so much to say.
Yeah, right. So that was the thing. I was like, why is this book, why does this keep coming up? Why does this keep, like she was on Fallon, and she was like,
Yeah.
she was on.
God, that's awful. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
She was on Fallon. She was interviewed by, I think Terry Gross interviewed her for NPR.
Of course.
And like all this stuff, and I was kind of like, what is, the thing with this book? And I remember, seeing some excerpts on like people posting on Twitter, like quotes, and I was like, oh Jesus, that were popping up from there. That and I know
were they popping them up? Were they popping it? Were they posting the quotes facetiously, or were they posting them like, this is the woke quote of the day?
Yeah, well, it was like, this is in this book, and it would just be like, boom. And I was like, oh, okay, interesting. So I need to dive into this. And through a colleague in a group chat with a band I was in, very left-leaning. All of us are like, we're left-leaning, are left-leaning people, socialists of some kind or another. A friend of mine and I were talking, I was like, I don't know about this book. I'm kind of like not sure like what the deal with this is. And so another person in the chat was like, the other person in the chat was like, this stuff is like hard science, it's completely accurate, and those who don't believe everything about this essentially like are on like the intellectual level of climate change deniers. And I was like, oh, okay, so I need to really look in this. Okay.
Were they saying that? Well, let me ask you both this question. Were they saying that from the perspective of, if you don't like this book, then you are a racist, or you don't believe racism exists, kind of thing? Is that the way it feels to you guys?
Well, I was more like, okay, not that like, maybe it was something like, if you don't believe everything about this book, or like her practices, or like the science around it, then like you're just kind of blind to this. Or like, not that racist per se, like, but like, that just like, if most of the time when I've seen like my like being like questioning this book, like just talking about it, it's kind of like, oh, so you're criticizing this must mean that you don't believe in this at all, like any of the problems that she's bringing up.
Did you feel the same way, Charles?
Well, so I'm a good writer, which means that I am a bad reader, because I don't read all the things I'm supposed to read. But when I actually got into it after Seth wrote his review, because Seth had mentioned
you actually
writing.
tried to read it?
Yes, I ended up reading it. Yeah. I was gonna say Seth ended up reading it, and then I ended up reading it, at least as far as I could get through. And so when I saw Seth's review, I was kind of like, is he sure? Because like, I'd heard a lot of the discourse around the book itself, which
from other white people, or
definitely from other white people. The
black
school,
voices weren't reading the white voices.
I don't. I don't. Yeah, I was gonna say it's. God, it was. For example, there's the place I work at. There's a few of the people there who actually have that book, and they're reading it. Although one person was reading it, and then I saw the book that they had set underneath it. It's Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. So I don't know how that works.
Dope.
God, but
clean room and clean of racial bias.
Yeah, right-wing Joseph Campbell. Right.
And so
that's all that means.
So basically, my whole approach to it was, first off, I always find myself skeptical when people talk about implicit bias or unconscious bias, because it's kind of like when people talk about God and they're like, oh yeah, God wants this, and it's like, wow, it sounds more like you want this, but that's all right. And so when people talk about unconscious bias, for me, it's kind of like they're projecting what they want to see onto something that they don't quite understand. So I ended up reading it, but I mostly ended up reading it out of a seeing Seth's review, as well as out of a general irritation that I carry around every day with people who like to promote their popular works and bother me about it, because I had a lot of people talking to me and they're like, oh, what do you think about this? And it's like, I think it's a white lady holding a bake sale. I don't take it
Damn.
all that
A racial
seriously,
bake sale?
but pretty
I
much.
called it. I think mine was like, I was a little like harsher. I called it woke Dianetics.
Yes.
A little bit.
So let me ask you guys this. I'm wondering if I should. I haven't read the book. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and say I have read the book. I have
It's
watched
alright.
several videos of her before the book came out, and before we are speaking right now, I watched an older video of her, and then I watched a book launch. And there's definitely a certain feeling I get when I watch some of these things, because I can't tell how much of it is performative, and I can't tell how much of it comes from some sort of sincere place of understanding maybe a level of privilege that one has, and trying to, I don't want to say rectify it, but trying to make amends through it, almost through the lens of doing it like a sitcom. And that's kind of how because if you watch, fuck it, maybe I'll put a link if I can remember. If you guys remind me, I'll put a link up to it in the. I'm definitely going to remember to put your Substack in the thing, but this I may forget.
Yes. Right.
I put a link to the book launch she had in Seattle. I don't know if she's from there or not.
Yeah, I think she is. Yeah.
So they do a land acknowledgement. I don't know if you guys have ever seen one of those where some generally white person comes on stage and acknowledges that they are on stolen land and they'll acknowledge the tribe that originally inhabited where they're supposed to have been. And when she says that, the crowd just goes crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what, why are you happy that you're on the land? Are you happy that she said something about this? Do you think saying something about that means anything?
It's like performative, and everyone kind of like thinks that's enough action to there's this reaction internally there. It's like, oh, okay, we just acknowledged it, so this is like enough.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what it is. So there's that. Like, I wish if we were live streaming, I'd share the thing with you, right? And I'd be like,
for sure,
right, yes,
fucking watch this. And there was part of me that if I would have got my times right, then I would have shared it with you guys to watch just the first like 10, 15 minutes of it. But true story, I'll tell you. So I told you guys I work at music festivals. So big surprise, most people that work in that field are white.
Yeah, definitely.
And
yeah,
the team I worked with wasn't all white. And this one year, it was the year Beyonce played. And this is totally coincidental. But it was the year we had the most like black people on our team. And there was 4 of us, including me. But there was probably 12 or 15 in the team as a whole. There was more to the team, but for the core people that always work at these festivals and not just the local hires we get, there was about 12 of us. And so the main people lived in this really dope ass fucking villa looking ass house in the Palm Desert with it had like a sick ass pool with like a lazy river and shit. It was like the sick. Well, our house. I'll show you pictures of the house we stayed in. It was cool too, but it paled in comparison to this house. And when they go, Jason, leave the local people at your place and come over to our spot, and we're gonna have a get together and barbecue and stuff. So we're hanging out, and we've traveled all over the world together, or not world, but the country, so we know each other pretty well. And this is the first time that I've actually had other black people with me. So we're talking just about where we're from, because all of us were from different areas. But there was like a common denominator of the areas that we were from. And that common denominator was crime. So we're talking about this, and we saw our white counterparts get very uncomfortable. and they just leave the room.
Oh.
And that becomes like a theme of the, and we're not out there for the 2 weekends, we're out there for 2 months. Set up, breakdown, all this other shit you have to do. And so that's a long time to spend with people that are like, when you guys talk this, and we're not talking shit like it's like an NWA video, you know what I mean? It's not like, man, I hate white people. Like, it's just, we're just literally talking about, hey, where are you from? I'm from St. Louis. Really? And if you would have walked in, that's what you would have heard.
Yeah.
Oh man.
But watching how uncomfortable they got made us kind of mad, because we're like, these cats say the most off the wall shit, do the most off the wall shit, and give not one single solitary fuck. And we also have to work a very racist festival after Coachella, which is Stagecoach. That's the country music
Oh my God.
Coachella. That's like the weekend after it's over.
It's like 2 yeehaws away from a rally, isn't it?
Oh, it's an interesting time. And so,
God.
It's like Branson. Jesus.
Yeah, yeah.
Jesus.
But more glamorous.
Yeah, Branson.
More glamorous, because you're in Southern California.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, okay, yeah, but it's more, and yeah. But so listening to Robin DiAngelo talk, the first time I heard her talk, and working and existing in these environments that she's talking about, because let's be clear here, she comes from a very metropolitan background, and her writing is for a very metropolitan corporate setting.
Yeah, I mean, her whole focus is like the corporate sector. That's it. Like, that's basically that's what she is trying to. That's her solution, is through this, because that's her. And that's fair. That's her. That's her background. That's what she's done for however many years, like 25, 30 years.
And if she's from the Seattle area, I've still yet to see black people there.
Well, yeah, it's the same. Like,
I heard they live there. I've heard. I know they're there when the Seahawks play.
Well, it's like Portland, right? Like,
Portland is Atlanta for white people. Yes.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's where, like, Ruby Ridge and all that. Like, well, in the Wild Wild Country, that whole thing happened.
That was a good documentary. But no, but I guess my question is, and there is, I don't know I'm literally just asking the question.
Yeah.
Does the teachings, does the acknowledgement of a certain level of, because there's so much bias that we can't say there's not. And there was a black woman actually that wrote a book about implicit bias, and then she actually worked with the Oakland Police Department and like the justice system. I can't remember her name, but she was finding that if you had more quote unquote black features, you were going to get longer sentences. When she was sitting there were, so we understand that it exists, but does this work help at all for the setting it's designed for? And again, I don't know the answer. I'm asking you.
I'll let Seth go first. He reviewed it.
So there was a review in the Bellows like last summer, and the title was I'm black and I'm scared of white fragility. Yeah, and and in the article, the writer, I don't remember the writer's name off the top of my head, but that they cited some studies that said, the implicit bias training specifically that like DiAngelo does is the science is kind of, a little out there if it's working or not, and there was like an NPR study that was like, this is actually just like reaffirming and just generating more like more problems, because like, people who would take part would just, be able to realize and just be able to what's the word I'm looking for? Not realize, but just either reaffirm those biases in some cases, or just be able to just be like, okay, yeah, basically just reaffirm them, or just be like, okay, yeah, it would reify them. It would just it would just make them worse in some cases. So
they would, instead of being like, I maybe I shouldn't look at Jerome like he's going to steal my wallet, they go, Jerome is going to steal my wallet.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, the science is out as if this is a way to, to go about, like fixing this problem. And no doubt, like, and throughout like my piece and like what I've talked about, is like, I don't doubt at all that there is implicit bias in the workplace, in schools, and etc. Mostly, I am just kind of skeptical of the method that DiAngelo uses over and over again in her work. Especially kind of, in various ways, like kind of just generating concepts in this way that she, um, one thing she does a lot in the book is kind of talk about, white people need to just, have a better racial stamina, which,
Racial stamina. What's that?
well, that you're able to
Like
just
dealing with black people?
Well,
Maybe
no,
I
that
need
you're
racial stamina.
no, it's like to be able to like
Oh,
because the big thing is like of her argument of her book is that like white people need to be conscious and aware of their whiteness and to identify with that whiteness and to be white. And that's one thing
So weird.
that exactly, that's kind of the thing. It's like that's kind of the issue. I think that's been kind of like I believe like people like Richard Spencer think really highly of themselves. They think really highly of their whiteness. Like they're pretty on like at the end of the book there's this section of the last chapter called kind of called it's called a positive white identity or something like that. And basically she says, we need to generate this positive sense of whiteness, this positive sense of being white. We need to go back to basically like our European roots and figure that out. And I was like, no, that's like the issue at hand. That's like what, like, that is some hardcore. That's what white
Like,
nationalists say.
I was gonna say
That's
it
like,
almost sounds like Jeffrey Sessions. I don't know if you guys remember a few years back. I don't forget what convention it was at. Jeffrey Sessions was on a panel. It was like a CNN panel or something, and he's like, "Wasn't for white people, there'd be no modern civilization."
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
everyone went,
yeah.
"Blah, blah, blah, "What?"
Well, and that's the thing. There's this kind of like, and why I call it like why I said woke Dianetics in this way is because there's this kind of like double speak, double concept overlapping, kind of negates each other issue throughout her book. I just got like a Dianetics glossary. My parents found it in my grandparents' stuff, and I was like reading through, and I was like, oh my god, like there's these concepts that like L. Ron Hubbard would say like it makes sense like logically, but then when you kind of think about it again and like kind of just question it, you're kind of like doesn't make any sense. But that's the whole thing with her work in this way. She kind of she brings you through this book and from a first person perspective and is like, listen, like yeah, I'm racist. I came from a racist. No, she says that like it's straight up like a quote. She's like, I'm racist. I came from a racist society. I am, problematic. And the thing about it is that no, I wasn't born into this society. I was born into this society. I didn't choose this society.
I was indoctrinated. I think she says something along those lines, right?
Yeah, I am indoctrinated, but at the same time, I replicate it. And like, there's this kind of, she's like, listen, this is a structural problem. She doesn't deny that, and I like her. There's kind of a surface level. She kind of builds it up, and it's like it's a structural thing. That's like yes, racial categories in the United States and like the concepts of like whiteness or blackness were generated, through conflict and to keep people, to keep black people enslaved and to keep white people away from black people. And especially, that's not, and I'm not denying that at all. And she doesn't deny, I'm like, okay, she doesn't deny that. And okay, cool. So then what's the thing? But to her, racial tensions and racial problems need to be dealt on the level of the individual and not dealt, on structurally through like economic, or political reforms. It's this kind of like
she's looking at racial problems probably from the aspect of like what do people say, microaggression, which a term I really don't like. Like I think she views it from the standpoint of commenting on your black coworker's hair or maybe implying that your black coworker has a child out of wedlock, or just some kind of silly stereotype that people flippantly do more often than cats think.
Oh yeah.
In casual conversation. And like and I feel like she maybe makes that the problem. Charles, what was your because I know you said you read it too.
Yeah, I read it, and I should be forthright about this. I didn't get all the way through it.
That's fine.
It kind of it just it was like nails on a
Did it
chalkboard.
make you feel, let me ask you guys this. Did it make you feel bad?
eh,
I'll let you answer, Charlie.
I have a ego that's the size of the universe that just is constantly expanding. So I didn't feel bad.
So
But
Robin DiAngelo is not going to make you feel bad.
no, but I guess my whole thing is this, and I'll relate this to the article I wrote that I sent you. So a lot of the discussion, and this applies to identity politics in general, and not to the people who share identities, but to the politics, the advocacy that's done in this country. But DiAngelo almost had almost a historical kind of a, like, it there, to me it seemed like almost a ahistorical kind of a take, where it's she acknowledges everything you're supposed to acknowledge, but then she kind of hand waves it away by pointing at the individual and saying, well, you know, it's on you to, like Seth said, he was quoting that thing at the end where it's kind of a contradiction. She's like, "Oh, I didn't choose this, but I replicate it." And it's weird. For me, I came to this idea while I was reading Frantz Fanon, which I've only started reading
So
him.
timeout. So you went
Yep.
from reading White Fragility to White Skin Black Mask.
I'm reading it
Yes.
right now. Yeah, same thing.
Right. Yeah, and I also and maybe somebody could say that DiAngelo's book works then or something, but
That's a
on
shift in tone like no other, my friend.
well, yeah, well,
Well,
I
and better writing. I mean,
What a
right.
palate cleanser.
Yeah.
Well, to be 100% fair, I'm a big fan of Jean-Paul Sartre, which is how it kind of ended up at that point, because Frantz Fanon had a long dialogue with Jean-Paul Sartre. Sartre wrote the preface of the introduction to The Wretched of the Earth. There was a long history there, and I decided that maybe to continue, because I do see a lot of things in a very Sartrean way, and so I decided to kind of continue into Black existentialism and see how the thought is developed outside of Paris cafes. And so when I was reading Frantz Fanon, there's an emphasis there about what I would call a neurotic orientation. That's how it's described in the introduction before you actually get to the reading of the book. And there's a talk about a neurotic orientation between for Fanon, it's between the colonizer and the colonized. And I got to reading that, which is where I got into reflecting upon DiAngelo and her work a little bit. All right, so I'm gonna have to sound like a nerd here for a second. So neurosis, as far as I'm concerned, I use the
You've
definition.
got time to fill.
Right. we or I use the definition provided by R.D. Laing, who's a 70s psychiatrist. He had some weird ideas, but he defined neurosis basically as the acceptance of non-being in order to avoid the loss of being. The best way to describe that is, if you've ever been embarrassed in front of a group of people and you feel like you want to be invisible, that's kind of the feeling of what neurosis is, but kind of in a larger, more persistent way. And so after reading DiAngelo and then moving on to Franz Fanon, Seth sent me an article by a woman named Melissa DePino, where her basic solution to the problems with racism and the problems with, like, what you were saying, where people are flippantly putting out stereotypes or being condescending, or where white people act like racism just started existing and they just discovered it and they talk about it forever. Her response, her solution, was for white people to just stick with white people. That's basically, in the end, I'd have to go find the quotation. It's in my article. But in the end, she says that white people need to stay with their people, which is, as Seth pointed out, it's very white supremacist. At least to
David
me, that's
Dukian.
what that's. Yes.
I believe
Yes.
I think part of it was like she said we need to gather our people and come together
Yes.
and like basically it was like I read that and I was like, oh my god.
So only white power can fix racism.
Right. Pretty much. Or it's like white power applied to itself. It's like if you're white, just go be with white people. Which stunned me, because I was just kind of like, okay,
Definitely been in some suburbs that looks just like that.
right, right, and it's like that's not really a solution. That's a solution that seems is carried out in America anyway. In the sense that that's what like you were saying with the suburbs and stuff. But in reading Franz Fanon, and then going back to kind of DiAngelo, because I reread Seth's review. I didn't really go back to the book
Again, you are
itself.
taking some sharp turns, my friend, but keep going. This is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're
There's
not even fucking around.
there's a ahistorical aspect to her work, and there's also a kind of a fake psychological take, in my opinion. Those are two separate things. But the ahistorical part is where she, as Seth said, she accepts that race was used to develop conflict, especially in the United States, and to keep the economic system kind of the way it is, keep it working the way it's supposed to be, which is agreed with. There's a author, Theodore Allen, who wrote a book on the can't remember the title. It's in my article. But basically, it's been noted. She accepts all the historical stuff, but then she hand waves it away and kind of treats race as something essential, like an essence, in kind of a Hegelian sense, where it's who you are. It's a part of the presentation of your existence.
And it's eternal,
Um,
right?
right. It's eternal. It's transhistorical. It's something that she decides can't be overcome and can't really be dealt with by the actions of the individual, the agency of the person. It's accept it, and you have to accept it, and all you can do is be nicer about it.
Does it feel like she's going to bestow upon the colored folks her benevolence and
Yes.
understanding, and
Right.
look down upon her subject?
It's kind of like the examples Franz Fanon gave about. He gave so many different examples, but there's various examples between colonizers who would bring on, like, he talked about an experience he had where he was brought on. I think it was him or somebody. I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly, but somebody was brought on as an intellectual, and they go, "Oh, this guy is a black intellectual," and they focused on the race of the guy before the guy gave his presentation, instead of focusing on what the guy was actually talking about. And so I think it develops into a kind of neurosis. And the reason neurosis is important for me is that basically it seems what white people are doing, at least the let's say the PMC DiAngelo types, is they will accept a position of kind of non-being, where it's non-being in the sense of, oh, we don't understand, it's outside of our lived experience, blah blah blah, all this stuff. But it's in order to maintain white identity as it is. It's in order to avoid that loss of being. because non-being would be telling white people to go deal with their own kind, stay out of it, don't you know don't try to help, you don't understand. And that's the non-being, that's the advocacy part, which is used to maintain white identity. It's And to me, if you maintain the notion of white as the way they do it, white culture, white identity, all that stuff, then you're maintaining the other racial relations, and it just keeps it where it is. It doesn't change anything.
It just reaffirms it, like it just kind of the same thing that like, that's what DiAngelo is doing. It's not, she kind of mentions class and other aspects of a person as just kind of like they're just there. They're just naturalized forms. Race is really to her the main focus. It's like for her, it's the engine. It's not like that's it. There's no other kind of like and her language too. It's very like us versus them versus every whites, blacks. That's like that's the language.
It is very white and black. There was something you guys Seth, you brought up the Vampire Castle, the Mark Fisher essay. Yeah. Mark Fisher of Zero Books. Yeah. His essay that comes up a lot in a lot of left spaces, the Vampire Castle. And as I'm reading over your guys' stuff again last night, my girl was watching the fucking Grammys in the background, and then I see Bill Burr was like trending. Oh, yeah. And which I found interesting, because for those that I don't think what he said was televised. For those that don't know, the Grammys is like 7 hours long, because it's a friend of mine has a couple Grammys. I don't think he had anything available this year, but he usually wins every year in blues category. Fantastic Negrito. And and the guy who produced this stuff produced like the Primus album. So if you're familiar,
yeah. I saw Primus once. Yeah.
So when they talk about the Grammys, they tell you about what it's like being at the Grammys when you're not winning an award, when people are there. There's like a handful of people there, and they just call your shit out. It doesn't have the pomp that you get from the main show. But you get an award nonetheless, so fuck them. And Bill Burr had said something during, I think, the televised part, presenting a Latin award, about woke feminists decrying his presence there, and he caught shit. And someone said to the effect, to white men being, I'm totally paraphrasing, but I'm not that far off, and the toxicity of white men. And then someone doubled down on that, was like, ban all white men. For the audio only podcast listeners, I am talking to two extremely white men.
Oh my god!
So when you see stuff like that trend on Twitter, and I don't know if you guys know Bill Burr, he's a
oh yeah, I do. Yeah, I
definitely.
Okay, well, I don't know if you know his work. I don't know if you dig it. If you don't dig it, but Bill Burr definitely pushes a boundary, and he definitely does it on purpose. Dave Chappelle the same way. Friend of show, friend in real life, Ben Burgess, his book is coming out called Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, kind of talking about this phenomenon. How do you think that stuff sits when we talk about the Vampire Castle and White Fragility? How do you think this kind of culture sits in there when we talk about these white guys like Bill Burr, that I didn't find offense to what he said, or nor did I find it really that offensive? What would Robin DiAngelo do?
That's a good question. Specifically, it's a good. Well, specifically, I mean, probably sit him through a long HR session, and
and let me say this. I'm sorry, Seth. To cut you off.
Yeah.
Because I have notes here, and I kind of fucked that up. Someone wrote on Twitter a while back. I don't remember the person's name. They have a very large following. I'm not trying to be funny. I really don't remember the person's name. And they said, and it was a white person, and they said, the only 80s movie that doesn't have racism, sexism, and homophobia that still stands the test of time is The Breakfast Club.
Oh.
And I said, word? Because John Hughes is notorious for not putting black people in his movies. So that's one reason why you don't see any racism in there. They just don't exist in his world. And the only black person I can think of in a John Hughes film, and I've seen them all multiple times, I am in my 40s, is the scene in Ferris Bueller where one black guy has no lines and steals a car with an ethnic looking man during Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Do they
Yeah.
steal
That's
his
the
car?
only
Is it?
black guy I can think of in any John Hughes film. So I brought that up and I was like, I guess I get what you're saying, but the 80s for some people are going to be a problematic era, but I wouldn't say that any movie is better than another. And the lady goes, thank you for pointing that out. I'm going to take this post down. I was like, no, don't take it down. You can have an opinion. Like, that's totally fine.
Right.
Yeah. I think the thing about it is that, yeah, it's like, have that opinion and we can talk about it, right? Like, just I am all for just have a discourse about it, and it's okay to be wrong. Like,
Mhm.
it's just okay to be, and we're gonna like learn through this. But I think a lot of people, I mean, especially Twitter, like Twitter is like the hot take Olympics. I'm just gonna I'm just gonna throw this up, and I think I'm gonna throw this up, and then I'm gonna start some shit, and then we're gonna all yell at each other, and then we're all just gonna be really angry at each other. But like the thing about it is that there's this kind of, it's kind of right now in a culture where it's like there is no there is no discourse in terms of like we're going to have a conversation about this. It's just you are on the right side or the wrong side about this, no matter like what the argument being is. And so like you mentioned like Ben Burgess, and I watched his video on Woody Allen, the art versus the Woody Allen, Ronan versus Pharaoh, which I haven't watched. I know, like, I mean, not Ronan, Allen versus Pharaoh, that I've watched a little bit of. But, I do appreciate Ben's, those videos of Ben just talking through this. And I think it's really great. But, he was saying, there's this kind of, the idea being that, okay, so, this person does something problematic. All right. Say like Woody Allen.
Mhm.
And yes, it is messed up. It, like what happened with Woody Allen. Now I don't know, again, don't know like who, like this, like who's right and who's wrong in the situation in that regard. And I'm not gonna, that's not my, I'm not gonna take a position on that specifically. But the discourse around anything like that, specifically since like Me Too, is that okay, that person did something. They are a tainted person, and everything they've done is tainted for the end of time. Like that, we're just gonna, their work is tainted. Their work is, on the side over here. Same thing with like, when Bill Burr says something, there's a specific, an outrage that happens where it's like, well, let's not like watch anything he's ever done. Let's kind of throw this to the side, and like, or Dave Chappelle. And I remember when Dave Chappelle came out with that special, and everyone called him transphobic, and like, tried to get his special off. I don't remember if they tried to get his special off Netflix, but I remember there was like a big anger fest about that. Yeah. So, I love Dave Chappelle. I like Bill Burr's stand up. For that matter, I like Louis C.K.'s stand up. He probably, a morally questionable person? Yeah, that's like, no doubt. But the work itself is, I would say, different from the artist. I separate the art from the artist in this regard. Like I am able to, but oh, sorry, what were you gonna say, Jason?
No. I just wanted to, kind of to your point about that, and kind of bringing it back to this Twitter anecdote. I took the conversation off of the public forum and sent the woman a private message, Because at a certain point, if I'm trying to talk to you where everyone can see what I'm saying, I'm trying to prove some sort of moral superiority.
Mm-hmm.
And I told the woman, I was like, look, I don't know you. I've never fucking met you. But I don't want you to take this tweet down because I said the thing about John Hughes. I've watched John Hughes movies. I'm going to show my kid Home Alone at some point. But I understand John Hughes and you know, John Hughes never came out and said, you know, I just don't cast niggers. Like he's never said anything along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know how he felt. It could have been Hollywood at the time.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know how John Hughes felt. Ultimately, there's been stories, but it's stories. The guy's dead. We don't know.
Yeah,
right?
it's all good. It's like it's hard to pinpoint.
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna go off on what I've seen from him. I mean, I watched the fucking Great Outdoors the other night just for the one scene where John Candy has to eat the 98-ounce steak. I think that's fucking hilarious.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to tell this person, I'm like, look, man, whatever you do, don't take this shit down because I'm not asking you to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not offended by that. My day's not going to get worse. No one's going to lose money over this. I'm not going to feel oppressed by this. Jordan Peele is still going to make a movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Ryan
yeah.
Coogler is going to make another like nothing is going to change with you saying this, and taking it down doesn't make anything better because in my mind, taking it down stops the conversation. And she goes on to say, well, you know, I'm white and I got to check my privilege. Kind of like almost like right out of the DiAngelo handbook, right?
Yeah. Well,
I got to understand in certain spaces. I can't say. I was like, spaces, motherfucker. This is the internet.
Well, and that's the thing. That's the thing about that is that like, and specifically DiAngelo like has this way of like this almost like this manual of like how to even have interracial discourse. Like you're supposed like she even says like we honestly we really can't treat people the same. We have to it's like no, we can't really do that. Like everybody, we have to treat people like differently, and we have to like it's almost like she really does treat like black people as another, even though she's fighting that, which it's like that in that regard. And it's like and now what like what you were saying with this person is like the when it seems anymore that it's like in the article I was like the Church of D'Angelo, but it's this thing where it's like it's almost like a signifier that has become meaningless where you're like I'm checking my privilege, where it's like you're not like it's just something you say now rather than just be like, okay, I need to understand structurally these issues. It's all again back to the individual.
I mean, how do you feel about that? I almost called you Chuck. Charles, how do you feel about that?
I have so many nicknames.
Chuckles.
Don't do that. We don't need that to come back.
But seriously,
So,
when you hear the whole like the story I just told this lady is like, I have to check my privilege. How do you feel when people say things like that? I need to check my privilege on a tweet about a movie they like.
So I tend to avoid the Twitterati jihadis, with their avatars fighting, their avatars fighting for their their causes and whatever. It's there's so many mean things to say. Let me start it off this way. I find that one of the things we have to accept as human beings is that we are destined to fail at something at some point. One of the things I like about Jean-Paul Sartre is, at least in his earlier work, he is like, listen, we are creatures of failure. We're going to fail. And it's like, that doesn't mean you don't do anything. It just means that you have to understand that some of the things you're going to do aren't going to be perfect. And we have this, I think since the internet is almost omnipotent, we have a tendency to project onto people this omnipotence where they can do, if you do wrong or say wrong or stuff like that, you did it knowingly. You did it, without it's kind of like when they talk about Harvey Weinstein and stuff, and they talk about the actors who were in his movies, the movies he produced and stuff like that. They go, oh well, did they know? And it's like, listen, it's like I go through most of my life not knowing probably about 90% of what's going on. So it doesn't if it's kind of this, we've given ourselves the status of we have to know everything all the time. You have to know what's going on. If you make a bad statement or you make a failure, it's not a failure, it's not a mistake, it's an intentional kind of thing.
Everybody's a grifter that does something that where they make. Yeah, yeah. I
Right,
feel you on
yeah.
that.
And so,
Uh,
I think people are grifters just in a different way, and we can get to that my horrible cynical view of the world. But um generally speaking, like with Bill Burr, taking shots at feminists. First off, I think he's always done that. He's
yeah.
always had a bit at
Yeah.
some point where he
Well,
makes
because
fun of feminists.
they've taken shots, and this is in no way to say I agree with everything Bill Burr has said. There are some things that
Right.
he said that is
Yes.
hilariously funny. His McDonald's story is
Yes.
one of the funniest bits ever. But they have been taking pot shots at him probably for the last 20 years.
Right. Exactly. And so the thing for me is this: is like, first off, if you can't have an ideological position that can take some shit because I don't know what your reasoning would be, then it's not an ideology. It's a personal conviction. It's something that makes you feel comfortable. And
Mm.
what I find with the whole DiAngelo thing is that it seems like DiAngelo has got the thing I've noticed about her work is it's almost a way for white people to avoid interactions with people who are not white by having an imaginary thing to interact with, like a set of words, like a set of I can't
A
think of the
script.
phrase. Yeah, it's kind of like a script. It's kind of like they're not interacting with you at the point that you get upset with them about something they've said, or like where you just merely pointed out the director didn't have any black people in his movies or anything except for Ferris Bueller. They immediately go to the script. They're not interact. For
Mm.
me, it's kind of like they don't interact with you anymore. They're going, oh, I need to check my privilege. I need to do this.
Yeah.
Are they actually doing that? No. It's kind of an imaginary relation that they have in place of you. It's
Well, yeah.
well,
Sorry.
just sorry, real quick, 2 seconds. So I worked
My
at a
bad. No, my bad.
restaurant. I worked at a restaurant for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and there you could see this. So you talked about this in a different way, but on the other side of the coin, I remember working there, and there's not always a lot of black people who are employed in places of liberty. Sometimes it's this restaurant had two. So, but whenever people would interact with them, you could see them kind of change how they react and change what they say and change how they talk. Um, one, yeah, it's like,
Brother, broham.
yeah, yeah, right,
Bro, man.
exactly, and and not to suggest any moral superiority or anything because I don't have that, but I didn't do that, but that's because social interactions are weird for me no matter what. So, but they would like you'd have people who would come up and they'd randomly start doing like weird dances and shit, be like, "Yo, bro, what's going on?" It's like, what are you doing? Yeah, exactly,
Jesus Christ.
exactly. That's what I would. It's like what? It's like what are
Well, is
you
that what
doing?
D'Angelo is trying to stop in her work? Is D'Angelo trying to stop you from dancing?
I
I
I'm
don't.
asking the question. I don't know the answer. I'm asking
Well,
the question.
I don't
go
know
ahead,
what
Seth. You go ahead.
I. You know. I guess so. I guess so. Yeah, to a certain extent. But it that it becomes very it becomes very unclear very quickly, like what in some cases she's trying to accomplish. You know what I mean? And like I said, she just because as we've talked about, she has this, we need to fight, racism in all its forms, and it's this permeating thing that is in all of society. It's deeply ingrained in everything, but at the same time, like, we can't do anything about it, because that is like kind of the end result of it. Like, and she's even said, it's like, well, I'm not gonna like fight capitalism, I'm not gonna fight the structure, like really, she's not gonna fight like economic and political conditions to get over this. Really, it's just, I'm going to moralize you into being this person, rather than like, rather than like structurally change these things, and then you know out of that, like out of the material conditions changing, maybe we can build a better society. Rather, I'm going to just sit here, you're going to sit in the seminar, and I'm going to shame you for
Right.
two
Well,
hours because you're forced to be here,
yeah,
like
to Seth's point, that's what I mean kind of by ahistorical, in the sense that it kind of seems like, and this is for me, this is maybe a difference between Seth and I about the book. It seems to me that she's trying to play nice in a corporate manner, where she's trying to get everybody. You don't have to change. You don't have to necessarily. You don't necessarily have to do a bunch of work. You just have to be nice. You know, and if you accept that people are like white people are racist no matter what, and there's nothing you can do about it, then the only thing you can tell them is play nice. That's it. And so I kind of think that's what she's doing. And
yeah,
ultimately,
I would agree with that.
right. And so ultimately for me, it's ahistorical in the sense that instead of going back and saying, listen, this is how this stuff has come to be, and then say, look, this is how this is how we live that history. This is how we continue the structures. This is what the structures look like. You know, for example, maybe pointing out the fact that oftentimes identity politics is evoked to avoid discussion about economic conditions. And it doesn't mean that
Mm-hmm.
the underlying issues of identity politics don't exist. It just means that they're being evoked cynically to stop discussion about economic conditions. And so that's why
Well,
I
and that's
considered it. That's okay. So that's why I kind of consider it a bit of a bit of a neurosis. It's kind of a you know I that neurosis that I described in my article for race relations, I think exists for all relationships within identity politics, where you have to define the identity you have or you accept in relationship to the type of oppression that it has. Like I feel that liberation would be the attempt to define one's identity through how that identity can transcend the given conditions of where it was founded. But it seems that it's more about the relationship of that identity to oppression itself. It's like, how oppressed does it make you? And there's no talk about how to overcome that. There's no talk about that. It's always this kind of ahistorical, very essential, very inescapable situation where we just got to be nice to each other. So go ahead, Seth. What were you gonna say?
No, sorry. Yeah, sorry I interrupted you. My bad. I didn't mean to like talk.
I'm so
And sorry
hurt.
if I'm.
Can't cancel Seth.
That's okay. That's okay. We're not in the studio anymore, so we have to do this via Zoom, which is a little clumsy. We got
Oh,
we got
sorry.
1 minute.
So,
Wrap it up.
like, to your point, Jason, about kind of like the where you were talking about earlier with like the vampire castle, right? So this kind of thing is that, like, this is the thing with, like, outside of this, like, we can't, like, questioning the vampire castle itself or within it is kind of like, well, questioning like why are we going after like not questioning why we're going after Bill Burr, but questioning like, okay, like, the vampire castle has its very like specific sets of ideas about things, and it's trying to like make that per se like the dominant culture per se, and like kind of replicating this kind of like this in terms of like cancel culture or like something like this is like in terms of like a media thing, media is kind of, in some cases, it kind of comes off as like we're trying to change like the past, or we're trying like not change the past maybe, but like we're trying to because of this like terrible stuff that has happened in the past, we're trying to like make it better, like change it in this kind of revisionist way, and or in some cases, and like questioning the vampire castle specifically, like on cases of like talking about like, well, maybe Bill Burr is this way, or like not Bill Burr is this way or that way, but questioning like, well, why are we going after this, or like questioning like or dissecting this thing. It's like, well, no, you're just not going along with it in some ways, like you're not. Yeah.
And it's also the first to respond, right? The first person to say the hot, mean take to call someone out is the winner, and you win the retweets. We were watching a documentary, my girl and I, on Basquiat not too long ago, and Warhol came up, and I was like, Warhol's 15 minutes has turned into 1,500 retweets. That's your peak moment in life, is going to be, not your 15 minutes of fame, but can I get 1,500 retweets and try to find a way to spin a career off this. This has been Seth and Charles. The name of their Substack, am I going to say this right? Ferocia
Anime. Yeah, it's Latin. It means ferocity of the mind. It's a Ferocia Anime.
These guys write more often than I thought, actually. I just signed up for the Substack today. We're going to be talking more. So if you want to hear the rest of this conversation, we're going to break down the 5 rules of the vampire castle and kind of how all this shit fits in there. And we're going to hear them talk about who was the best dressed at the Grammys. So if you want to hear their Grammy takes on Megan Thee Stallion's outfit and the performance of the Black Pumas, then you're going to have to be a patron to hear that. And I am out.